I managed my wife's father's investment fund for 17 years, making his clients billions. Then he declared, "My son Noah will replace you, so clean your desk for him." The next morning, he smirked and asked, "Ready to hand over your client list?" I smiled back and said, "No, I'm here, too." His smile immediately vanished. My name is Marcus Alvarez, and for 17 glorious years, I ran my father-in-law's investment fund like it was some kind of money printing wizard machine that never jammed, never broke down, and certainly never disappointed. We're talking billion-dollar returns here, people. 0 losing quarters, not one zilch, nada. The kind of track record that makes Wall Street priests weep into their overpriced whiskey and wonder if maybe, just maybe, they should have actually learned how markets work instead of just memorizing which fork to use at the Four Seasons. I was the quiet genius behind the curtain, the guy who actually understood what all those numbers meant while everyone else was busy pretending that confidence and a firm handshake could substitute for actual competence. Spoiler alert, they can't. Ernest Ross, my father-in-law and the supposed titan of finance, strutted around Manhattan like a peacock who just discovered mirrors, taking credit for everything while I sat in my office doing the actual work. You know the type. Expensive suits, even more expensive watch, and the kind of ego that needs its own zip code. He loved telling people at cocktail parties, "My son-in-law runs my fund." With this proud little smirk like he just announced he'd cured cancer or discovered a new planet. I'd stand there nursing my drink, silently correcting him in my head. "Your son-in-law doesn't run your fund, Nest. Your son-in-law, the fund." Big difference. Massive, actually. It's like saying the engine runs the car versus the engine, the car. Without me, Ross Capital was basically just a fancy name on a building and a bunch of people who looked good in LinkedIn photos, but couldn't read a balance sheet if their Hamptons vacation home depended on it. For 17 years, I played this game. I showed up every morning at 6:30, drank coffee that tasted like it was brewed in Satan's kitchen, and made Ernest Ross look like the smartest man in finance. I analyzed markets, predicted trends, restructured portfolios, and basically performed financial wizardry while Ernest took 3-hour lunches, and complained about his golf handicap. The man spent more time selecting ties than understanding treasury yields. But hey, who's counting? Our clients trusted us. Well, trusted me, though they didn't know it, with their billions, pension funds, university endowments, sovereign wealth funds from countries I couldn't pronounce after 2 martinis. They all thought Ernest was some kind of investment guru, the Oracle of Manhattan, or whatever ridiculous nickname CNBC had given him that week. Meanwhile, I was the one pulling all-nighters, running models, stress testing scenarios, and making sure Mrs. Henderson from the Teachers' Retirement Fund could actually retire someday instead of greeting people at Walmart until she was 90. But then came the bombshell. And when I say bombshell, I mean the kind that makes Hiroshima look like a firecracker at a kid's birthday party. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were when I usually had my standing call with the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And I was actually looking forward to it because those Scandinavians appreciated competence. Ernest waddled into my office. And yes, I said waddled because the man had discovered cupcakes sometime in his 60s and never looked back with that permanent scowl etched into his face like someone had carved it there with a rusty butter knife. "Marcus," he said, not even bothering with pleasantries because Ernest Ross considered basic human decency to be something other people did. "My son Noah will be replacing you as Chief Investment Officer. Clean out your desk by Friday." I'm pretty sure my brain short-circuited for a solid 10 seconds. Noah Ross, the same Noah who once asked me in complete seriousness if Nasdaq was a rapper or something during a family dinner. The same Noah who thought diversification meant having both checking and savings accounts. The same Noah who'd failed the Series 7 exam 3 times and only passed on the 4th attempt because I'm 90% sure he cheated. I kept my poker face, though. Years of dealing with Ernest had taught me that showing emotion was like showing weakness to a shark. It just made them hungrier. But in my head, I was having a full-blown conversation that went something like, "Sure, Ernest. Great idea. Fantastic. Brilliant. Even let's put the Titanic captain's nephew in charge of navigation. What could possibly go wrong? While we're at it, why don't we let a golden retriever perform brain surgery?" I hear they're very enthusiastic. Ernest stood there waiting for me to beg or plead or maybe cry a little because that's what he wanted. He wanted me to gravel, to admit that I needed him more than he needed me to validate his pathetic little power trip. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I nodded slowly like I was actually considering the brilliant wisdom of his decision and said, "Interesting choice, Ernest. Very bold." He seemed confused by my calm reaction, which was hilarious because Ernest Ross understood calm reactions about as well as a toddler understands quantum physics. He cleared his throat, puffed out his chest like he was trying to intimidate a mirror, and added, "This has been coming for a while. Noah's ready. He's been learning the business." Learning the business. The kid had been learning the business for 5 years and still couldn't explain what AP ratio was without consulting Google. But sure, Ernest. Sure. He's totally ready to manage $2 billion in client assets. This will definitely end well. I should probably start buying popcorn futures because this show is going to be spectacular. When does Noah start? I asked, my voice so neutral it could have been used to calibrate scientific instruments. Monday, Ernest said, already turning to leave because he delivered his verdict and that was that. Kings don't stick around to hear the peasants' opinions. Monday, I repeated, watching him waddle back toward the door. That gives him what? 4 days to learn 17 years worth of institutional knowledge, client relationships, and market expertise. Generous timeline, Ernest. Really generous. He paused at the door and for a second I thought maybe, just maybe, a single neuron had fired in that expensive haircut of his and he'd realized what a catastrophically stupid decision he just made. But no, Ernest Ross didn't do self-reflection. Instead, he just grunted something that might have been, "You'll train him," and disappeared down the hallway. I sat there in my office surrounded by 17 years of Bloomberg terminals, client files, market reports, and the various trophies Ernest had claimed credit for, and I started laughing. Not the happy kind of laughing, mind you. This was the kind of laughing that happens when something is so absurdly cosmically stupid that your brain can't process it any other way. Noah Ross, Chief Investment Officer of a multi-billion-dollar fund. This wasn't just a mistake. This was the Hindenburg, the Titanic, and New Coke all rolled into one gorgeous disaster. And I had front row seats. And the best part, I didn't have to do a damn thing except watch it burn. Sunday dinner at the Ross family mansion in the Hamptons was always an exercise in expensive torture, but this particular Sunday promised to be especially entertaining. The mansion itself was so absurdly large that even the ghosts probably had personal assistants and 401k plans. We're talking 12 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, a wine cellar that could double as a nuclear bunker, and enough marble flooring to make a Greek temple jealous. Ernest had bought it during the dot boom to prove he'd made it, which is rich people code for I have more money than taste. I pulled up in my Audi, understated, classy, the kind of car that whispers success instead of screaming it like Ernest's ridiculous Ferrari that he couldn't drive worth a damn. Adriana, my wife, sat in the passenger seat doing that thing she always did before family dinners, deep breathing exercises like she was about to enter a war zone, which let's be honest, wasn't far from the truth. Sunday dinners with the Ross family made Game of Thrones look like a pleasant brunch. "You okay?" she asked, glancing at me with those dark eyes that had somehow convinced me years ago that marrying into this circus was a good idea. "Tired." I lied. Which was my standard response whenever I didn't want to explain what I was actually thinking. The truth, I was mentally drafting Noah's professional obituary for LinkedIn. Noah Ross, failed investment officer, is survived by his father's money and a profound misunderstanding of how financial markets work. In Lie of Flowers, please send textbooks on basic economics. We walked in through the massive front door. And yes, it was one of those doors that required actual effort to open, like you were entering a medieval castle instead of a beach house. The smell hit me immediately. Expensive food prepared by someone who'd probably trained in Paris and was now stuck cooking for people who thought ketchup was a vegetable. The Ross family was already assembled in the dining room like some kind of wealthy Last Supper painting. Except everyone was alive and nobody was about to get betrayed. Well, except me. But I'd already been betrayed on Tuesday, so this was really more of a victory lap for Ernest. Ernest sat at the head of the table, naturally, because God forbid anyone forget who was supposedly in charge. His wife, Catherine, perched beside him like an expensive decoration, the kind of woman who'd had so much Botox that her face looked permanently surprised by everything. Noah was already there working on what appeared to be his third glass of wine, which explained the slightly glazed look in his eyes. The kid drank like he was trying to forget something, which was ironic because with his track record, forgetting was actually his superpower. Marcus Adriana Ernest boomed, standing up like he was greeting visiting dignitaries instead of his own daughter and the son-in-law he'd just fired. "Come sit. We have news to celebrate." Adriana shot me a look that clearly said, "What news?" Because apparently Ernest hadn't bothered to tell his own daughter that he'd just blown up my career like it was a sand castle and he was a toddler with anger issues. Typical Ernest. Communication wasn't his strong suit. Neither was empathy, self-awareness, or basic human decency. But who's keeping track? We sat down and I noticed immediately that the table was set with the fancy china, the stuff Catherine only brought out for special occasions, which usually meant Ernest wanted to show off. Crystal wine glasses that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, silverware so polished you could perform surgery with it, and cloth napkins that felt softer than most blankets. The Ross family didn't do anything halfway except apparently succession planning. Dinner started with small talk, the kind of meaningless chatter that rich people use to avoid discussing anything real. Catherine asked about our apartment in the city. Noah mumbled something about a girl he was seeing who worked in marketing or PR or something. Ernest complained about his golf game, which was apparently suffering because his new caddy didn't understand his system, which I'm pretty sure was just code for, "I'm terrible at golf, but need someone to blame." I kept quiet, pushing around some kind of fancy salad that had more ingredients than my college chemistry set. Adriana noticed my silence and leaned over, whispering, "You're being weird." "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said, smiling that smile I perfected over the years. The one that said, "Everything is fine." While my brain was screaming, "Your father is an idiot and we're all doomed. Just tired from the week. You know how it is." She didn't buy it. But before she could press further, Ernest stood up, tapping his crystal wine glass with a fork like he was about to make a toast at a wedding. Everyone stopped eating, forks frozen midair like some kind of expensive freeze frame. This was it, the big announcement. The moment Ernest would reveal his master stroke of genius that was definitely going to end in tears, bankruptcy, or both. "Everyone," Ernest began, his voice dripping with the kind of confidence that only comes from being spectacularly wrong about something and not knowing it yet. "I have wonderful news. As of Monday, Noah will be taking over as Chief Investment Officer of Ross Capital." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with one of those fancy knives. Catherine's permanently surprised face somehow looked even more surprised. Adriana's fork actually clattered onto her plate, the sound echoing through the dining room like a gunshot. Noah, already tipsy, raised his wine glass like he'd just been promoted to shift manager at Burger King and was really proud of himself. "Dad," Adriana started, her voice tight. "What are you talking about?" "Marcus is the CIO. Marcus has always been the CIO. Was the CIO? Ernest corrected, sitting back down with a satisfied smirk that made me want to throw my expensive salad at his expensive face. It's time for new leadership. Fresh perspectives. Noah has been preparing for this moment his entire life. His entire life. The kid was 32 and still didn't know how to tie a Windsor knot without YouTube tutorials. But sure, Ernest, he's totally been preparing for this moment just like I've been preparing to become an astronaut by occasionally looking up at the sky. Adriana turned to me, her eyes wide with betrayal. "You knew about this?" "Found out Tuesday," I said calmly, taking a sip of wine that suddenly tasted like vinegar and poor life choices. "Wanted to see how dinner went before mentioning it." "Before mentioning it," she hissed, keeping her voice low, but not low enough. "Marcus, this is insane. Noah can't run the fund. He doesn't know the first thing about I've been learning." Noah interrupted, his words slightly slurred, which really inspired confidence in his ability to manage billions of dollars. "Dad's been teaching me. And I've been reading books, lots of books about investing in stuff. Books about investing in stuff. Ladies and gentlemen, your new Chief Investment Officer." Ernest beamed at his son like he just cured cancer instead of revealing himself to be spectacularly unqualified for a job he was starting in less than 48 hours. "Noah's ready. He's got the Ross instinct. The Ross blood. That's what matters in this business." I nearly choked on my wine. The Ross instinct. The Ross blood. This wasn't medieval Europe, and we weren't talking about inheriting a throne. We were talking about managing other people's retirement savings, their kids' college funds, their entire financial futures. But apparently Ernest thought bloodlines mattered more than actual competence, which explains so much about why he'd needed me for 17 years. Catherine, bless her Botoxed heart, tried to steer the conversation elsewhere. "Well, this is exciting. Noah, sweetheart, what are your plans for the fund?" Noah blinked at his mother like she'd asked him to explain quantum physics in Mandarin. Make it grow. Keep the clients happy. Do what Marcus has been doing." Except Marcus actually knew how to do what Marcus was doing, I said, unable to help myself. Everyone turned to look at me. "Just saying. 17 years of experience doesn't transfer through osmosis, Noah. This isn't the Matrix. I can't just upload my knowledge into your brain." Ernest's face turned an interesting shade of purple that clashed terribly with his expensive shirt. "Marcus, we appreciate everything you've done, but it's time to move on. This is a family business and it should be run by family." "Funny," I said, keeping my voice level even though I wanted to flip the entire table and watch expensive china shatter like Ernest illusions. "For 17 years, you had no problem with me running it. Made you billions, zero losing quarters. But sure, Now it's suddenly about family. Makes total sense. Adriana grabbed my hand under the table, squeezing it in that way that meant, please don't start World War II. At Sunday dinner, but I was past caring. I leaned forward, looking directly at Ernest with a smile that probably looked pleasant but felt like bared teeth. Ernest, let me tell you something, and I want you to really hear this because it's important. You've just made the most expensive mistake in your company's history. Probably your life, actually. But don't worry, I'll be watching from the sidelines with popcorn when it all burns down. Everyone laughed nervously. That uncomfortable kind of laughter people do when someone says something that might be a joke but probably isn't. Catherine tried to change the subject again. Noah raised his glass in another sloppy toast. Adriana looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow the entire table, but Ernest just smiled back at me, smug and satisfied, completely convinced he'd won something. And me? I kept smiling too because I knew something Ernest didn't. I wasn't joking. Not even a little bit. Monday morning arrived with all the enthusiasm of a funeral, complete with gray skies that looked like God himself was disappointed in humanity's life choices. I showed up to the Ross Capital offices at my usual time, 6:30 in the morning, because markets don't care about your sleep schedule, and neither do clients in Tokyo who want answers before their lunch break. The building was one of those Manhattan glass towers that screamed, "We have money, and we want everyone to know it." All polished surfaces and expensive art that nobody actually looked at because they were too busy pretending to understand modern finance. I walked past security. "Morning, Marcus." "Morning, Jerome." And took the elevator up to the 14th floor, where Ross Capital occupied enough square footage to house a small village, but instead housed about 40 people who spent their days staring at screens and pretending the numbers made sense. The elevator doors opened with that soft ding that always sounded way too cheerful for a Monday morning. And I stepped into what I knew would be the most entertaining disaster since the Hindenburg decided to park next to an open flame. Noah was already in the main conference room, and I used the word already loosely because it was almost 7 o'clock and the kid looked like he just rolled out of bed, threw on a suit that cost more than most people's cars and called it professional. His hair was doing that thing where it sticks up in the back like a confused rooster, and he was sweating through his dress shirt despite the air conditioning being set to Arctic tundra. In front of him were stacks of legal documents, client files, and what appeared to be a compliance manual that was thicker than a phone book from the 90s. He looked up when I walked in, and the relief on his face was almost sad. Almost would have been sadder if he hadn't been complicit in taking my job. But details. "Marcus," he practically yelped, standing up so fast he knocked over his coffee cup. Thankfully, it was empty because watching him try to explain coffee stains on a $100 million client agreement would have been comedy gold, but also probably illegal. "Thank God you're here. I've been looking at these files since 5 in the morning and I mean, there's a lot here. A lot. That's generally what happens when you run a multi-billion-dollar investment fund," I said, setting down my bag and grabbing my own coffee from the break room. "There's paperwork, regulations, clients who expect you to know what you're doing. Revolutionary concept, I know." He missed the sarcasm completely, which was Noah's superpower, being oblivious to everything, including social cues, market trends, and apparently the concept of preparation, right? "Yeah. No, I get that. But maybe we could co-manage, like work together, transition period and all that." I took a long sip of my coffee, which tasted like it had been brewed in a parking lot, but was still somehow the best part of my morning. "Buddy, let me explain something to you. Clients with $2 billion don't want a group project. This isn't high school chemistry where you can slap both names on the lab report and hope for a B-. These are pension funds, university endowments, sovereign wealth funds. They want one person in charge, and that person needs to actually know what they're doing." His face felt like I just told him Santa wasn't real, and also his dog died. "But Dad said," "Your dad says a lot of things." I interrupted, sitting down and pulling up my Bloomberg terminal because even though I was technically fired, the markets didn't care about office politics and I still had professional standards. "Doesn't make them true. Now you've got your first client call in about 20 minutes. The Pimpton Pension Fund for $100 million under management. They're going to ask about Q3 projections and the new infrastructure play we've been developing. You ready?" The color drained from Noah's face like someone had pulled a plug. "Q3 projections? Infrastructure play? Marcus? I don't even know what." "Then I suggest you figure it out," I said, not unkindly, but not exactly warmly either. "You're the chief investment officer now. This is what CIOs do. They take calls from clients and don't sound like confused interns." The conference call started at 7:30 sharp. Robert Kramer from Pimpton came on the line with his usual gruff efficiency. "Former Marine, No nonsense, the kind of guy who could smell incompetence through a phone line. Morning, Marcus. Got your new guy there with me? Morning, Robert. I said, gesturing for Noah to unmute himself. Noah Ross is here. He's taking over as CIO. There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that speaks volumes. Noah Ross. Ernest Kidd. That's the one. Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear Robert's brain processing this information and arriving at the same conclusion a calculator would if you asked it to divide by 0. Error. Right. Well, Noah, I'll cut to the chase. We've been with Ross Capital for 8 years. Marcus has made us a lot of money. A lot of money. My retirees love him, but we need to know. What's your experience? What's your strategy? Why should we stay? Noah looked at me like a drowning man looks at a life preserver. I looked back at him with the emotional support of a brick wall. This was his show now. Time to perform. Well, Mr. Kramer, Noah started, his voice cracking like a teenager going through puberty. I've been, learning the business from my father. He's taught me a lot about, investing in markets and things. Things. He said things to a $400 million client. Things, Robert repeated, his voice flat. Noah, I'm going to be straight with you. Your father didn't make us money. Marcus did. And if Marcus isn't running the fund anymore, I'm not sure why we're still in it. I need numbers, strategy, confidence. What I'm hearing right now is a kid who sounds like he just learned what the stock market is last week. Noah was spiraling, his face turning red, sweat pouring down his temples like he was running a marathon in the Sahara. Marcus is here. Marcus, can you? I'm not the CIO anymore, I said simply, examining my fingernails like they were suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. Answer the man's question. Robert didn't wait. Tell you what, Noah, I'm going to talk to my board. We'll be in touch. Marcus, good luck with whatever you do next. You're going to need it if you're leaving this circus. The line went dead. Noah stared at the phone like it had just bitten him. He hung up. Yep. What do I do? Pray he doesn't pull his money, I said, standing up and stretching. But between you and me, he's absolutely pulling his money. Probably by end of day, which means you've got about 8 hours before Ernest finds out you just lost $400 million. $400 million? Noah actually stood up so fast his chair fell over backward with a crash that echoed through the office. Several people poked their heads in to see what had died. Marcus, you have to help me. You have to call him back. You have to. I don't have to do anything, I said calmly, gathering my things. This is your rodeo now, cowboy. But hey, look on the bright side. You've only got about 12 more client calls today. What's the worst that could happen? The worst, as it turned out, happened pretty quickly. By 9 o'clock, Columbia University's endowment had requested a meeting to discuss recent management changes, which was university speak for, we're about to dump you, but want to be polite about it. By 9:30, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, the one I'd been looking forward to talking to before Ernest decided to play Russian roulette with the company, had sent an email requesting clarification on leadership transitions, which was Norwegian speak for, what the hell are you people doing over there? Noah was falling apart faster than a sand castle at high tide. He kept trying to answer questions he didn't understand, using words he'd clearly just Googled 5 seconds earlier, and generally giving off the vibe of a golden retriever who'd accidentally been put in charge of air traffic control. It would have been funny if it wasn't so predictable. Actually, scratch that. It was still funny. Predictable and funny aren't mutually exclusive. By 10 o'clock, Ernest stormed into the office like a tornado in an expensive suit. His face that special shade of purple that usually preceded either a heart attack or a temper tantrum. Sometimes both. What the hell is going on? He bellowed loud enough that everyone in the office suddenly found their computer screens absolutely fascinating. Pimpton just pulled $400 million. Kolia is talking about leaving. The Norwegians are asking questions. Noah, what did you do? Noah looked like he might cry, which would have been sad if I wasn't already mentally composing my I told you so speech. Dad, I tried. I really tried, but they're asking questions I don't know how to answer, and Marcus won't help me. And Marcus, Ernest whirled on me like I was personally responsible for gravity and traffic jams. This is your fault. You sabotaged him. I didn't do anything, I said, sipping my coffee, which had gone cold but still tasted like victory. I just sat here and watched your son try to do a job he's catastrophically unqualified for. You wanted him to be CIO. Congratulations. This is what that looks like. Ernest opened his mouth to yell something else. Probably something about loyalty or family or whatever other excuse rich people use when their terrible decisions come home to roost. But before he could, his assistant burst in looking like she'd just witnessed a murder. "Mr. Ross, the board is on line 1. They're asking about the Pimpton withdrawal and Columbia just sent official notice. They're pulling out too. $320 million. Ernest's face went from purple to white so fast I was genuinely concerned he might actually have that heart attack. $720 million gone in less than 3 hours. I just sat there sipping my terrible cold coffee and thought to myself, should have brought popcorn. This was going to be a long day and I was going to enjoy every single minute of it. 2 weeks later, the financial news headlines were having more fun than a tabloid journalist at a celebrity divorce trial. Ross Capital implodes. Billion-dollar fund loses 60% of assets in record time. Ernest Ross' son causes market catastrophe. Wall Street's fastest collapse since Lehman Brothers. My personal favorite was from the New York Post because of course it was like father unlike son Ross Capital's spectacular faceplant. They'd even photoshopped Noah's face onto a crashed airplane. Classy stuff. I'd framed it and hung it in my home office right next to my Series 7 certificate and my MBA from Wharton because irony deserves premium wall space. The carnage was actually impressive in its thoroughness. After Pimpton and Columbia bailed, it was like watching dominoes fall except each domino was worth hundreds of millions of dollars and made Ernest Ross age about 5 years per day. The Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund pulled out, then the Massachusetts State Pension Fund, then a bunch of family offices whose names I couldn't pronounce, but whose money I'd been growing for years. By the end of week 1, Ross Capital had gone from managing $2.1 billion to barely holding on to $400 million. And most of that was Ernest's personal money that he couldn't pull out without admitting he destroyed his own company. Ernest predictably blamed me for everything except the weather. And honestly, I'm surprised he didn't try to pin that on me, too. According to him, I'd poisoned the well, sabotaged his son, and orchestrated a conspiracy to destroy Ross Capital, which was hilarious because the only thing I'd orchestrated was showing up to work and watching Noah face plant into professional oblivion like an Olympic diver who'd forgotten about the whole water part. But the best part, the absolute chef's kiss moment of this entire disaster. Ernest had called the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. He'd actually filed a complaint claiming I'd engaged in market manipulation and breached my fiduciary duty by deliberately causing client withdrawals. I'd laughed so hard when my lawyer called to tell me that I'd nearly spit coffee all over my laptop, which would have been tragic because I was using it to track exactly how fast Ross Capital was circling the drain. The SEC investigation lasted approximately 48 hours before they closed it with a letter that basically said, "Mr. Ross, your son is incompetent and clients have every right to leave. This is not Marcus Alvarez's fault. Please stop wasting our time. We have actual crimes to investigate." They didn't phrase it exactly like that because government agencies have to pretend to be polite, but the subtext was clear enough that even Ness should have been able to read it. Should have being the operative word. I was sitting at home on a Wednesday afternoon because when you get fired, every day is technically a weekend when Adriana came home early from her gallery. She ran an art gallery in Chelsea, one of those places that sold paintings people pretended to understand while drinking wine that cost more per glass than most people's hourly wage. She was good at it, had an eye for talent, and most importantly had built something that had nothing to do with her father's money or influence. I respected that about her. Maybe it's why we'd lasted 8 years of marriage despite the fact that her family made the Borges look functional. She found me in my office, feet up on the desk, reading the latest Wall Street Journal article about Ross Capital's unprecedented collapse with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for finishing a really good book or watching your enemy step on a rake in a cartoon. "Marcus," she said, closing the door behind her with that particular firmness that meant we were about to have a conversation. Capital letters, bold font, probably some italics for emphasis. "We need to talk." Always an ominous start, I said, setting down the newspaper, but not the satisfaction. "What's up?" She crossed her arms, which was never a good sign. Adriana was beautiful when she was angry. Dark hair, darker eyes, the kind of bone structure that made sculptors weep. But right now, she looked less beautiful and more about to commit justifiable homicide. "Don't play dumb. You know exactly what's up. My father's company is collapsing. Noah's having panic attacks. My mother won't stop calling me crying and you're sitting here reading about it like it's the comic section." In my defense, I said the comic section isn't nearly this entertaining. "Marcus, I'm serious. This has to stop." "What has to stop?" I leaned forward, dropping the casual act because apparently we were doing this now. "Your father fired me. Your brother took my job. I didn't pull the trigger on any of this. I just declined to throw myself in front of the bullet. You could have helped Noah. You could have made the transition smoother. You could have." I could have. What? Adriana held his hand while he tanked a multi-billion-dollar fund. Your father didn't want to transition. He wanted to prove that the Ross name was worth more than actual competence. Congratulations to him. He proved the opposite. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, and I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. This wasn't easy for her. Caught between her family and her husband, between loyalty and logic. I got that. I wasn't entirely heartless, despite what Ernest probably told people at his rapidly dwindling social gatherings. Just admit it, she said quietly. Admit that you planned this, that you wanted this to happen. I thought about lying. Would have been easy enough. But 8 years of marriage had taught me that lying to Adriana was like lying to a polygraph machine that could also divorce you and take half your stuff. So instead, I told her the truth. Planned? No, I didn't sabotage anything. Didn't have to. Your father's incompetence and Noah's lack of qualification did all the heavy lifting, but anticipated? I shrugged. Yeah, I anticipated this like a guy carrying an umbrella in London. You see the clouds, you know rain's coming. You prepare accordingly, so you just let it happen. Adriana, those clients didn't leave because I told them to. They left because Noah couldn't answer basic questions about their portfolios. They left because Ernest replaced 17 years of expertise with nepotism and a prayer. I didn't push them out the door. Your family opened it and your brother greeted them with incompetence. I just didn't stand in the way. She was quiet for a long moment processing this. Then she asked the question I've been waiting for. Why? Why not help? Even just a little for me. And here's where I had to make her understand something that people like the Rosses never quite grasped because they'd never had to learn it the hard way. Let me tell you a story, I said, leaning back in my chair. When I was 8 years old, my dad worked 3 jobs. 3 morning shift at the factory, afternoon doing construction, nights driving for a delivery service. My mom cleaned houses for rich families who treated her like she was invisible. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens where the heat only worked half the time and the cockroaches had more square footage than we did. Adriana knew this story, but she'd never heard it like this. Never heard the edge in my voice. The weight of years behind the words. I learned early that in this world, loyalty without power is like Wi-Fi at the airport. It's there, sure, but it's basically useless and everyone's just using it until they find something better. Your father had my loyalty for 17 years. I made him rich. I made him look smart. I sacrificed weekends, holidays, sleep, everything to build his reputation. And the second it was convenient, the second he wanted to play dynasty with his unqualified son, he tossed me out like yesterday's newspaper. So, this is about respect, she said. Respect? I agreed. And watching Noah cry into his $2,000 suit. That part's definitely a bonus. She almost smiled at that, which was progress. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen, sighed, and showed it to me. Ernest calling for probably the 5th time that day. Don't answer it, I said. Marcus, seriously, don't let him sit with his choices for a while. She declined the call, but I could see the guilt on her face. Family loyalty was a hell of a drug, even when your family consisted of a father who valued ego over competence and a brother who probably couldn't find his own ass with both hands and a GPS. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Curiosity and a desperate hope that it was a telemarketer I could verbally destroy to blow off some steam. Marcus Alvarez, I answered. Mr. Alvarez, this is Sandra Chin from the Securities and Exchange Commission. I sat up straight. Adriana's eyes went wide. The SEC calling back wasn't good. Wasn't good at all. Miss Chun, I said carefully. How can I help you? We've completed our investigation into Mr. Ross's complaint. I'm calling to inform you that we found no evidence of wrongdoing on your part. In fact, we found that your contract included specific client protection clauses that were legally sound and professionally appropriate. Mr. Ross's complaint has been dismissed with prejudice. I exhaled. That's good to hear. There's more, she continued. Several of the clients who withdrew from Ross Capital have reached out to us asking for your contact information. Apparently, they're interested in working with you independently. I can't officially provide referrals, but I'm not aware of any legal reason why you couldn't start your own fund. I looked at Adriana, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Thank you, Miss Chun. I appreciate the call. After I hung up, Adriana asked, what was that about that? I said slowly, a smile spreading across my face. Was the sound of Ernest shooting himself in the foot so hard he hit an artery? He tried to bury me. Instead, he just made me the most powerful unemployed man on Wall Street. Powerful and unemployed, she repeated. For now, I said, but something tells me that's about to change. And the really beautiful part, Ernest had done this to himself. He'd filed that stupid SEC complaint, which meant every client who left Ross Capital now knew definitively that I hadn't done anything wrong, that I was the competent one, that if they wanted their money managed properly, they should probably call me instead of the guy who'd replaced expertise with his idiot son. Irony, I decided, was absolutely delicious. 3 days after the SEC called to tell me I was officially innocent of crimes I'd never committed, which felt like getting an award for not punching people who deserved it, I found myself sitting in a conference room that cost more per hour to rent than most people made in a week. The offices of Pritchard and Associates occupied 3 floors of a midtown skyscraper with views of Central Park that probably added an extra zero to their billing rates. Everything screamed, "We're expensive and we know it." From the leather chairs that felt like sitting on clouds made of money to the coffee that actually tasted good, which meant it probably cost more per cup than a decent bottle of wine. Douglas Pritchard walked in exactly on time because lawyers like him didn't do fashionably late. They did precisely punctual because time literally was money and they billed in 6-minute increments. He was in his mid-50s. Silver hair, tailored suit that probably cost what I used to make in a month back when I was starting out, and the kind of smile that made you think of sharks and tuxedos. He'd built his reputation defending white-collar cases that made headlines. And from what I'd heard, he'd never lost a case that mattered. The ones he did lose were apparently strategic losses, which as lawyers speak for, I got paid either way. "Marcus Alvarez," he said, extending his hand with a grip that was firm without being aggressive. "I've been following your situation with great interest. The Ross Capital implosion is the talk of every law firm in Manhattan. Well, that and the Mets, but the Mets are always disappointing, so your story is more entertaining." "Glad I could provide entertainment," I said, sitting down across from him. "Though I'm not entirely sure why I need a securities lawyer when the SEC already cleared me." "You don't need me for the SEC," Pritchard said, opening a folder that was stuffed with documents. I recognized my employment contract, my client agreements, the whole paper trail of my 17 years at Ross Capital. "You need me because Ernest Ross is going to sue you probably within the next 2 weeks. And when he does, I want to be the one standing between you and whatever lawyers he manages to scrape together from the legal equivalent of the clearance bin. He's going to sue me." I leaned back, processing this for what? Doing my job too well? Making him look bad by comparison, having basic competence, breach of fiduciary duty, tortious interference with business relationships, probably something about trade secrets, or non-compete violations. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that Ernest Ross is a desperate man watching his life's work circle the drain. And desperate men do stupid things. Suing you is stupid, but it'll make him feel better temporarily, like scratching an itch that's actually poison ivy. I had to admit, the guy had a way with words. "So, what do we do?" Pritchard smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me genuinely glad he was on my side. "We win spectacularly. But first, let me show you something beautiful." He pulled out my employment contract, the one I'd negotiated when I first started at Ross Capital back when I was young and hungry and foolish enough to think Ernest Ross valued loyalty. "Did you write these client protection clauses yourself?" "Most of them," I admitted. Ernest's lawyer at the time thought I was being paranoid. I thought I was being thorough. "You were being a genius," Pritchard said, running his finger down a page that was covered in yellow highlighter. "Look at this. Section 7, subsection C. In the event of material changes to fund management structure, including but not limited to replacement of the chief investment officer, clients retain the right to withdraw funds without penalty within 90 days of notification." You built a legal escape hatch for every single client. I figured if I ever left or got hit by a bus, clients should have options. You built more than options. You built a perfectly legal self-destruct sequence. And Ernest Ross is the one who pushed the button. Pritchard was actually grinning now, like a kid on Christmas morning who just unwrapped exactly what he wanted. Every client that left, they were legally entitled to leave. You didn't encourage them. You didn't solicit them. You didn't do anything except exist while Noah Ross demonstrated why nepotism is a terrible business strategy. This isn't breach of duty. This is Ernest Ross breaching his duty to his clients by replacing competence with his gene pool. I sat there letting this sink in. I'd written those clauses 17 years ago as insurance, never really thinking I'd need them. But apparently past Marcus had been looking out for future Marcus, which was nice of him. "So when Ernest sues me, if he sues you," Pritchard corrected. "And he will. When he does, we're going to counterclaim for wrongful termination, reputational damage, and emotional distress. We'll depose Noah and make him explain under oath why he thought he was qualified to manage $2 billion. We'll depose Ernest and make him admit that he fired you for personal reasons, not performance reasons. And then we'll settle for enough money that you can start your own fund without needing investors. That's aggressive. Marcus Ernest Ross tried to destroy your career out of jealousy and ego. Aggressive is the minimum acceptable response. Nuclear is what I'm actually recommending, but I'll let you work up to that. Before I could respond, Pritchard's assistant knocked and entered, followed by a man I vaguely recognized from client meetings over the years. Robert Kramer from the Pimpton Pension Fund, the first domino to fall in the Ross Capital collapse. He was in his 60s. Gray crew-cut ramrod straight posture that screamed former military and the kind of handshake that could crack walnuts. Marcus Kramer said, sitting down without being invited because men like him didn't wait for permission. "Good to see you away from that circus." "Robert," I said, genuinely surprised. "What are you doing here?" "Saving you the trouble of calling me," he said bluntly, which was very on brand for him. "I pulled $400 million from Ross Capital because Noah Ross couldn't tell me the difference between a stock and a bond. But that money still needs managing and my board still needs returns. So here's what I'm offering. Come work for Pimpton as a consulting partner. $5 million base salary, 20% of returns over benchmark. Full autonomy over investment strategy." I blinked. $5 million base, 20% of returns. That was more than I'd made in 3 years at Ross Capital combined. "You want me to manage the Pimpton Fund?" "I want you to manage our portion of the Pimpton Fund," Kramer corrected. $400 million to start. If you perform like you did at Ross Capital, we'll add more. If you don't, we part ways. Simple as that. No nepotism, no politics, just results. Pritchard was watching this exchange with barely concealed amusement, like he'd known exactly what was coming. "Robert reached out to me last week. He explained, several of your former clients did. Actually, they're not interested in Ross Capital anymore. They're interested in you." "Several," I repeated, 7 to be precise, Pritchard said, pulling out another folder because apparently today was folder day. "Pimpton with $400 million, Columbia University's endowment with $320 million, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund with $200 million, 3 family offices totaling another $300 million, and 2 private equity firms that want to know if you're available for consulting. All told, you're looking at approximately $1.5 billion in potential assets under management." I sat there doing math in my head that made my brain hurt in the best possible way. $1.5 billion at industry standard fees was a lot. A lot. Enough to start my own fund, hire my own team, build my own empire without Ernest Ross's name anywhere near it. "There's one condition," Kramer said, because of course there was. "You can't work for Ross Capital in any capacity. Not now, not ever. We don't want Ernest Ross anywhere near our money, even indirectly." That, I said, smiling for what felt like the first time in weeks, is the easiest condition I've ever been asked to accept. I'd rather eat glass than work for Ernest Ross again. Kramer grunted in approval. "Good. Then we have a deal. My lawyers will send over the contracts by end of week. Welcome to the big leagues, Marcus. The real big leagues, where competence actually matters." After Kramer left, Pritchard leaned back in his expensive chair with a satisfied expression. "So, still think you need me more than ever?" I admitted, because when Ernest finds out about this, he's going to lose his mind. "Oh, he already knows," Pritchard said casually. "Robert made sure to send Ernest a courtesy email this morning informing him that Pimpton was entering into a consulting agreement with you. Professional courtesy and all that. I imagine Ernest is currently either crying, drinking, or drafting lawsuit papers. Possibly all 3 simultaneously." I thought about Nest in his massive office, reading that email, realizing that I hadn't just survived his attempt to bury me. I'd thrived. That the clients he'd lost weren't gone. They just followed the competence. That he'd basically handed me $1.5 billion and a reputation as the guy who was too good for Ross Capital. "You know what the best part is?" I said to Pritchard. "Tell me, I didn't even have to do anything. I didn't sabotage him. Didn't poach clients, didn't spread rumors. I just existed and he destroyed himself trying to destroy me." Pritchard raised his coffee cup in a toast to incompetent enemies. "May they continue to defeat themselves while we collect the paycheck." I clinked my cup against his, thinking about Ernest Ross right now, probably turning that special shade of purple he reserved for special occasions like heart attacks and public humiliation. Part of me, a very small part, almost felt bad for him. Almost. The rest of me was too busy mentally shopping for private islands, because apparently that was a thing I could do now. Revenge, I decided, wasn't just a dish best served cold. Sometimes it was served with a side of 7-figure consulting contracts and the knowledge that your enemy had played himself so thoroughly that historians would study it as a case study in hubris. And honestly, that tasted pretty damn good. 3 months after Ernest Ross had pulled the trigger on what historians would probably call the dumbest business decision since New Coke, I found myself doing something I'd fantasized about for years. Absolutely nothing related to Ernest Ross while he suffered the consequences of his own actions. I was in my apartment. Well, technically it was a penthouse now because that Pimpton consulting gig came with bonuses that made my old salary look like allowance money watching CNBC purely for entertainment value. They were covering the Ross Capital Board meeting like it was the Super Bowl of financial disasters, complete with expert commentary and dramatic music. My phone buzz, text from Douglas Pritchard, turn on Bloomberg. There's streaming audio from the boardroom. Someone leaked it. This is better than anything on Netflix. I switched channels faster than Ernest Ross could lose client money, which by this point was pretty damn fast. Bloomberg had somehow gotten audio from inside the Ross Capital boardroom, which meant someone on that board hated Ernest enough to commit what was probably several felonies just to watch him squirm in high definition. I respected that level of pettiness. It spoke to me on a spiritual level. The audio crackled to life, and I heard Ernest's voice, though it sounded different than I remembered. Tired, defeated, like someone had let the air out of his ego and all that was left was a sad, deflated balloon in an expensive suit. Gentlemen, ladies, Ernest began using his formal board voice that usually preceded him asking for more money or more authority or both. I've called this emergency meeting to discuss our current financial position and strategic options moving forward. Strategic options? That was Margaret Whitmore, one of the board members who had been skeptical of Nest's management style since before it even joined the company. She was old money, Yale educated, and had the kind of voice that could cut glass and egos with equal efficiency. Ernest, we don't need strategic options. We need a miracle or a time machine. Preferably both. I grabbed popcorn from my kitchen. Actual popcorn. This was happening. Our assets under management have decreased from $2.1 billion to $400 million, Ernest said. Reading from what I assumed were prepared remarks because Ernest Ross improvising had historically ended badly for everyone involved. This represents an 81% decline over a 3-month period. An 81% decline, someone else repeated. I didn't recognize the voice, but they sounded like they were trying very hard not to scream. Ernest, companies get shut down for less than this. Ponzi schemes have better retention rates. How did you manage to lose 81% of assets in 3 months? Market volatility, Ernest started. Don't you dare blame the market, Margaret interrupted. And I could hear her slap something on the table. Probably a report or possibly just her hand for dramatic effect. The market is up 17% this year. The S&P is hitting record highs. Every other fund is making money hand over fist. You're the only one hemorrhaging assets like a stuck pig, and we all know why. Silence on the audio. Beautiful, awkward silence. I made a management decision, Ernest tried again. You fired the only person who knew what he was doing and replaced him with your unqualified son, Margaret said, her voice sharp enough to perform surgery. That's not a management decision, Ernest. That's nepotism wrapped in incompetence and served with a side of ego. My grandson could have told you this would end badly. And he's 7 and thinks the Tooth Fairy manages his college fund. Someone on the board actually laughed at that. Not a polite boardroom chuckle, but an actual laugh that suggested they'd been holding it in for 3 months and couldn't anymore. Noah has been learning, Ernest said weakly. Noah has been crying in his office every day since he started. Another voice chimed in. Robert Shun, the CFO, who'd always been brutally honest about numbers because numbers didn't care about feelings. He lost Kolia University $400 million in the first week. The Norwegian fund 3 weeks after that. Every client call ends with them asking when Marcus is coming back and Noah telling them Marcus isn't coming back and them withdrawing their funds. It's like watching someone repeatedly touch a hot stove and act surprised when they get burnt. I was genuinely enjoying this more than my own wedding, which probably said something about my priorities, but also about how boring my wedding had been. Adriana's parents had insisted on a traditional ceremony, which meant I'd spent 6 hours smiling at people I didn't know, while they ate food that cost more than cars and gave speeches about love and family that aged like milk in the sun. The staff morale is at an all-time low. Another board member added, 3 of our senior analysts quit last month. They all said the same thing. They didn't want to work somewhere that valued family connections over actual talent. One of them literally said, I didn't get my CFA to watch Ernest Ross's kid learn fractions. That's enough, Ernest said, but his voice had zero authority. He sounded like a substitute teacher asking high schoolers to quiet down. We can recover from this. We just need time. And the audio suddenly got louder and I heard a door slam open. Then a voice I recognized, Wendy McCullough, the general of the pension fund and not Robert Kramer's boss, but his peer from a different fund. She was a legend in the industry, known for 2 things, making money and taking absolutely zero from anyone, regardless of their net worth or family name. Time. Wendy's voice boomed through the boardroom like God had decided to personally weigh in on Ernest's incompetence. You want time, Ernest? You lost us $40 million. $40 million. Do you have any idea how many teachers' retirements you just made significantly worse? How many nurses? How many firefighters? Ms. McCullough, this is a closed board meeting. Ernest tried. I don't care if it's a closed colonoscopy. Ernest, I'm here because you won't return my calls. Your son cries when I email him. And I want to look you in the eye when I tell you that we're pulling every remaining dollar we have with Ross Capital today. Right now, before you lose that, too. More silence. The kind of silence that happens right before something breaks permanently. You can't do that, Ernest said. And I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice like water into a sinking ship. Your contract has a 90-day withdrawal clause. Written by Marcus Alvarez, Wendy interrupted. Who, by the way, I consulted with last week. You know what he told me? He told me Ross Capital is a dumpster fire that's trying to buy gasoline to put itself out. He showed me projections that suggest you'll be bankrupt within 6 months. He analyzed your current holdings and found 17 positions that violate basic risk management principles. 17. Ernest. Your son doesn't know what he's doing. Your staff doesn't trust you and your clients are running for the exits like the building's on fire. I sat there popcorn forgotten because I hadn't actually consulted with Winnie McCullough. But apparently someone had told her I said this or she was making it up for dramatic effect. And honestly, it was working beautifully. Marcus said that Ernest's voice was barely a whisper. Marcus didn't have to say it. The numbers say it. Your quarterly report says it. Your empty offices say it. Ernest, you're done. This company is dead. You just haven't admitted it yet. Then she apparently dropped a stack of papers on the table because I heard a loud thump followed by Wendy's retreating footsteps and another door slam. The board erupted, everyone talking at once, voices overlapping in a symphony of panic and recrimination. I caught phrases like fiduciary responsibility and legal liability and how do we salvage this? Mixed with what sounded like someone suggesting they all resign immediately before the ship fully sank. Margaret Whitmore's voice cut through the chaos. Ernest, the board has discussed this. We think you should reach out to Marcus Alvarez. Offer him whatever it takes to come back. Equity, salary, hell, offer him naming rights. Alvarez Capital has a better ring than Ross Capital at this point anyway. I will not crawl back to Marcus, Ernest said. And for the first time in the recording, he sounded like the old Ernest. Proud, stubborn, completely divorced from reality. I built this company. My name is on the building. I'll burn it to the ground before I beg him to come back. Then I guess we're bringing marshmallows, Margaret said dryly, because that's exactly what's about to happen. The audio cut out. Bloomberg's anchor came back on, barely containing their excitement. That was leaked audio from today's emergency board meeting at Ross Capital, where it appears the company is in its death throes following the departure of Chief Investment Officer Marcus Alvarez 3 months ago. We've reached out to both Ernest Ross and Marcus Alvarez for comment. Mr. Ross's office declined to comment. Mr. Alvarez couldn't be reached, though sources say he's currently consulting for several major funds and living his best life. I muted the TV and just sat there processing what I just heard. Ernest would rather burn his company down than ask me to come back, which meant the company was definitely burning down and I wouldn't have to do a single thing except watch the flames and maybe roast some marshmallows. I texted Pritchard back, "You were right. Better than Netflix." His response came immediately. "Wait until you hear what I found out about Ernest's personal finances. Spoiler alert, he's leveraged to his eyeballs. When Ross Capital goes under, he's going under with it. Might want to start looking at office space. I have a feeling you'll be getting a very interesting offer soon." I smiled, set down my phone, and unmuted the TV just in time to hear another analyst say, "This is what happens when you let ego override intelligence." Marcus Alvarez built an empire. Ernest Ross is watching it crumble. And somewhere Alvarez is probably laughing. Not laughing, I said to my empty penthouse. Just appreciating the irony though. Okay, fine. I was also laughing a little. Sue me? Actually, scratch that. Ernest probably would sue me and I'd win that too. 6 months after Ernest Ross decided to play Russian roulette with his company using a fully loaded gun. I was thriving in ways that would have made my younger self weep with joy and maybe buy a lottery ticket just to see if the luck held. Alvarez Capital. Yeah, I'd started my own fund because when life hands you $1.5 billion in assets and a reputation for competence, you don't waste it. Was managing $3.2 billion. 3.2 with AB for beautiful and also billion. We'd outperformed the market by 8% in our first quarter, which in investment terms was like showing up to a knife fight with a tank and winning by forfeit. I had a corner office in a building that didn't have Ernest Ross's name anywhere on it. A team of analysts who actually knew what they were doing and clients who called me to say thank you instead of to complain that their fund manager couldn't read a balance sheet. Life was good. Life was great. Life was exactly what happens when competence meets opportunity and ego stays homesick. Ernest, on the other hand, was living what marketing people would call a different experience. Ross Capital had officially filed for bankruptcy 3 weeks ago, which was financial speak for we give up. Everyone was right. This was a terrible idea. The company that Ernest had spent 30 years building, that had once managed billions and employed dozens of people, was now worth less than the office furniture. And speaking of office furniture, most of it was being auctioned off to pay creditors, which meant Ernest imported Italian desk was probably going to end up in some startup's conference room being used to hold pizza boxes and broken dreams. My phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Unknown number, which usually meant either a telemarketer or someone who owed me money and hoped I wouldn't answer. I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Marcus Alvarez. Marcus. The voice was rough, tired, aged about 10 years beyond where it should have been. It's Ernest. I sat up straighter in my chair, which was genuine leather, and didn't creak when I moved because I could afford quality now. Ernest Ross was calling me. Ernest, I'd rather burn my company down than crawl to Marcus. Ross was actually calling me. Ernest, I said carefully. This is unexpected. I thought you had my number blocked after that SEC investigation you filed. Can we meet? He asked, ignoring my comment because acknowledging his mistakes wasn't exactly Ernest's strong suit. Please, just coffee or lunch, whatever works for you. The please was what got me. Ernest Ross didn't say please. Ernest Ross gave orders and expected the universe to comply. Hearing him say please was like hearing a shark apologize. Technically possible, but so rare you had to document it for science. When tomorrow there's a cafe near Battery Park, small place, quiet translation, somewhere nobody would recognize him and document his humiliation on social media. I got it tomorrow at 2, I said. I'll be there. The cafe was one of those places that tried too hard to be authentic Italian, complete with checkered tablecloths and pictures of the Colosseum that looked like they'd been printed at a Staples. Ernest was already there when I arrived, sitting in the back corner like a spy in a bad movie, and I almost didn't recognize him. He'd lost weight, a lot of it. The expensive suits hung off him like he was a kid playing dress-up in his father's closet. His face was gray-drawn, the kind of gray that happens when stress becomes a permanent resident in your body. His hair, which had always been perfectly styled, looked thin and defeated. He looked like a ghost of himself and not the cool kind of ghost-like from movies. The sad kind that haunted empty houses and made people feel uncomfortable. Marcus, he said, standing up when I approached. His handshake was weak, uncertain, nothing like the crushing grip he'd always used to establish dominance in business meetings. Ernest, I sat down across from him. You look terrible. Thanks, he said without humor. I feel worse. A waitress came by. I ordered coffee. Ernest ordered water, which told me everything about his current financial situation. Water. Ernest Ross, who used to order $50 whiskey like it was tap water, was now ordering actual tap water. We sat in silence for a moment. The kind of awkward silence that happens when two people have too much history and not enough neutral ground to stand on. I'm sure you've heard about the bankruptcy. Ernest finally said, read about it in the journal. I confirmed. Front page. They used that picture of you from the charity gala 3 years ago. The one where you're smiling. Nice contrast to current events. He winced but didn't argue. I wanted to meet because I owe you an explanation. Maybe an apology. I'm not sure which or if there's a difference anymore. I'm listening. Ernest took a breath and when he spoke his voice cracked just slightly. I was jealous of you for years. Maybe the whole 17 years. I don't know anymore. You made it look easy. The analysis, the client relationships, the returns. Everything I'd spent my whole life trying to prove I could do, you just did naturally, like breathing. The bankruptcy courthouse smelled like a combination of stale coffee, broken dreams, and industrial cleaning products that were trying really hard to mask the first two. It was one of those government buildings that looked like it had been designed by someone who thought depressing was an architectural style. All gray walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like they were auditioning for a zombie movie. The chairs in the waiting area were that specific shade of blue that only exists in places where hope goes to die. Hospitals, DMVs, and apparently bankruptcy courts. I sat in the gallery with Douglas Pritchard beside me. Both of us wearing our best serious business suits because even though this was essentially a financial funeral, you still had to dress appropriately. Pritchard had his briefcase on his lap stuffed with documents that had taken his team 3 weeks to prepare. The $12 million offer for Ross Capital had been accepted by the bankruptcy trustee, the creditors, and Ernest himself, which meant today was just the official ceremony where a judge banged a gavel and made it legal. Ernest sat at the defendant's table, though defendant wasn't quite right since this was bankruptcy court, not criminal court, but he sure looked like a defendant. Gray suit that used to fit him before he'd lost all that weight. Shoulders slumped like he was carrying invisible weights. Face still that disturbing shade of gray that suggested his body was just going through the motions of being alive. His lawyer was some guy from a mid-tier firm, the kind of lawyer you hire when you can't afford the sharks anymore and have to settle for the guppies. Noah sat in the gallery a few rows behind his father. And I was surprised to see him there at all. He'd lost weight, too, though. In his case, it actually looked healthy. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit, just khakis and a button-down that looked like it came from Target or maybe Kohl's clearance rack. He caught my eye and nodded. Not hostile, just acknowledging like we were two people who'd survived the same natural disaster and were still processing the damage. The judge entered all rise and the shuffle of people standing, and we got down to the business of officially killing Ross Capital and transferring its corpse to me. Judge Patricia Morrison was in her 60s, had the kind of face that suggested she'd seen every stupid financial decision humanity could make and wasn't impressed by any of them, and a reputation for running her courtroom with the efficiency of a German train schedule. Case number 2025 BK 4782 Henry Ross Capital Management. She began reading from documents with reading glasses perched on her nose. We're here for the approval of asset sale to Alvarez Capital Management LLC. Mr. Pritchard, you're representing the buyer. Pritchard stood. Yes, Your Honor. Marcus Alvarez, principal of Alvarez Capital Management, is purchasing all assets, intellectual property, and naming rights of Ross Capital for $12 million cash. And Mr. Ross, you're in agreement with this sale? The judge looked at Ernest like she was trying to determine if he was competent to make decisions or just a very elaborate hologram of sadness. Ernest's lawyer stood. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Ross has consented to the sale and wishes to make a brief statement. If the court permits. Judge Morrison sighed the sigh of someone who knew brief statements in bankruptcy court were never actually brief but had to allow them anyway because rules. Keep it short, Mr. Ross. Ernest stood slowly, gripping the table for support like he might collapse without it. When he spoke, his voice was rough, the words clearly painful to say. Your Honor, I built Ross Capital 30 years ago with the dream of creating something lasting, something I could pass down to my children. Instead, I destroyed it through pride and poor judgment. Marcus Alvarez spent 17 years making my company successful while I took credit. When I fired him and replaced him with my unqualified son, I sealed the company's fate. He paused, swallowing hard. This sale is just acknowledging what's already true. Ross Capital died the day I let Marcus walk out the door. At least this way something good might come from the ashes. The courtroom was silent. Even Judge Morrison looked slightly uncomfortable, which probably didn't happen often given her job involved watching people lose everything on a regular basis. Thank you, Mr. Ross, she said not unkindly. Mr. Alvarez, do you wish to make a statement? Pritchard looked at me. We hadn't planned on me saying anything, but something about the moment felt like it needed words. I stood. Your Honor, I'm purchasing Ross Capital, not out of sentiment, but because the infrastructure and systems I built over 17 years have value. The name will be retired. The company will be absorbed into Alvarez Capital. What Ernest Ross built is over. What I'm building is just beginning. Short, professional, and just a tiny bit brutal. Exactly what the moment called for. Judge Morrison nodded, made some notes, and then picked up her gavel. The court approves the sale of Ross Capital Management's assets to Alvarez Capital Management for $12 million. Mr. Alvarez, the company is yours. This case is closed. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. And just like that, I owned everything Ernest Ross had spent 3 decades building. I signed papers, lots of papers. The kind of papers that transfer ownership of bank accounts, client lists, office furniture, and the right to use the name Ross Capital, which I had zero intention of using because rebranding a failed company was like putting lipstick on a pig. Possible, but pointless. Ernest signed papers, too. Each signature looking shakier than the last, like he was signing away pieces of his soul instead of just financial assets. When we were done, when all the lawyers and trustees and court officials had their copies, Ernest approached me in the hallway outside the courtroom. You won, he said simply. I looked at him. Really? Looked at him. This broken man who once strutted around Manhattan like he owned it. No, Ernest, you lost. There's a difference. I didn't win anything except the opportunity to clean up your mess and turn it into something functional. 1 year later, Alvarez Capital was doing the kind of numbers that made financial journalists run out of superlatives and start inventing new ones. We were managing $3.2 billion in assets. That's billion with AB for bloody hell, that's a lot of money. And our returns were making other funds look like they were investing in lottery tickets and hope. 18% growth in our first full year, which in the investment world was like showing up to a track meet and casually breaking the world record while eating a sandwich. Clients were literally waiting in line. And I don't mean metaphorically. We'd had to hire a client relations team just to handle the inquiries from pension funds, endowments, and family offices who wanted in on whatever magic we were selling. Except it wasn't magic. It was just competence, consistency, and not letting ego make investment decisions, which apparently made us unicorns in an industry full of people who thought confidence could substitute for actual analysis. My office was everything Ernest had pretended to be. Corner location, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, furniture that was expensive because it was functional rather than showy. And most importantly, a door with NY name on it. Not my father-in-law's name, not some legacy I'd inherited. Just Marcus Alvarez, Principal Alvarez Capital Management. Every time I saw it, I felt something that was probably unprofessional to admit. Pure, undiluted satisfaction. I was reviewing Q3 projections when my assistant knocked. "Mr. Alvarez, you have a visitor." Says his name is Noah Ross. No appointment, but he says it's personal. Noah Ross. I hadn't seen him since the bankruptcy hearing a year ago. Hadn't heard from him except for one Christmas card that had a picture of him with a bunch of high school kids holding a math team regional champions trophy. I'd almost thrown it away, but Adriana had insisted we keep it on the fridge like we were proud parents or something. "Send him in," I said, curious despite myself. Noah walked in looking completely different from the sweating, panicking mess I remembered from Ross Capital's final days. He'd filled out a bit, looked healthy, was wearing jeans and a button-down that probably cost $40 instead of $400. His hair was shorter, practical. He looked like a normal person instead of a rich kid playing dress-up in the finance world. "Marcus," he said, not offering a handshake, just standing there with his hands in his pockets. "Thanks for seeing me without an appointment. I know you're busy. I've got 20 minutes before a call with the Norwegians," I said, gesturing to a chair. "What's up?" He sat down looking around the office with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not jealousy exactly, more like appreciation, understanding, nice place, clean, professional, not trying too hard, unlike your father's office, which looked like a museum dedicated to himself. Exactly like that. Noah agreed with a small smile. "I came to thank you. I know that sounds weird, but hear me out." I leaned back in my chair, which was ergonomic and didn't creak because I could afford quality now. "I'm listening." A year ago, I was the most hated person in finance. The guy who tanked $1 billion fund in 3 months. The poster child for why nepotism is toxic. I couldn't get a job anywhere in the industry. Hell, I couldn't get a job at a bank branch. I was basically unemployable. He paused, meeting my eyes directly. "But you know what you didn't do? You didn't destroy me. You could have. Pritchard told me you had grounds to sue me personally for gross negligence. You had evidence I'd signed off on trades I didn't understand. You could have made sure I'd never work anywhere doing anything ever again. I considered it. I admitted. But you didn't. You went after Dad. You bought his company. You took everything he'd built. But you left me alone. And that gave me space to figure out who I actually was instead of who Dad wanted me to be. I hadn't thought about it that way, honestly. I'd just been too focused on Ernest to bother with Noah. The kid had been a pawn in his father's ego game and punishing pawns felt like overkill. "So now you're teaching high school math and coaching basketball," I said. "And I love it," Noah said. And he sounded genuinely surprised by this fact. Like actually love it. I wake up excited to go to work. I help kids understand concepts that click in their brains and you can see the moment they get it. We won regionals last year in basketball. One of my students got into MIT early admission. It's not running $1 billion fund, but it's real. It's mine and I'm actually good at it. "That's great, Noah." "Really? But I'm guessing you didn't come here just to tell me about your career change." He laughed. "No, you're right. I came to tell you something Dad would never say because Dad's still too proud and too broken to admit it. You and him, you're not that different." I felt my jaw tighten. "We're nothing alike." "You're exactly alike." Noah countered, not argumentative, just stating what he saw as fact. "You both worship loyalty. You both keep meticulous score of every slight, every betrayal, every time someone doesn't value you the way you think you deserve. The difference is you protect your loyalty better. You're smarter about it. You don't give it away to people who don't earn it. Dad gave his loyalty to the wrong things. His ego, his name, his legacy. You give yours to competence and results. I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat because maybe possibly Noah had a point buried in there somewhere. Dad destroyed his life chasing respect from people who didn't matter. Noah continued, he wanted to be important more than he wanted to be good. And it killed him. Killed his company, his marriage, his relationship with me and Adriana. But you built something real. You earned respect instead of demanding it. And that's the difference between you two. You're what Dad could have been if he'd been honest with himself. The silence in my office was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of Manhattan traffic 14 floors below. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because Adriana asked me to. Noah said simply. She's worried about you. Says you've won everything. The money, the company, the reputation, the revenge, but you're still angry. Still keeping score. Still treating life like it's a competition you need to dominate. She thinks you're becoming the thing you defeated, and she asked me to talk to you because apparently I'm the only family member you don't completely hate. I don't hate you, Noah. I know. That's why I'm here. He stood up preparing to leave. Look, I'm not saying Dad deserves forgiveness. He doesn't. He's a broken, bitter old man who destroyed everything he touched because he couldn't handle being second best at anything. But you've already won, Marcus. You've won so completely that there's nothing left to fight. At some point, you've got to decide if you want to be the guy who defeated Ernest Ross or the guy who built something better than Ernest Ross ever could. He headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and congratulations, by the way. Adriana told me the news. You're going to be a great dad. Just try not to keep score with your kid. Yeah, trust me, that doesn't end well. After Noah left, I sat there staring at my desk, at my computer screen showing market data and portfolio performance, at all the evidence of my success, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Uncertain was Noah, right? Was I just Ernest with better execution? Was I winning everything except the things that actually mattered? My phone buzzed. Text from Adriana. Coming home early, made your favorite for dinner. We need to talk. I looked at my schedule. 3 more calls, 2 meetings, a conference with the investment team about Q4 strategy. All important, all urgent. All the things that had consumed my life for the past year while I'd been busy proving Ernest Ross wrong and building my empire. I texted my assistant, cancel everything after 2 p.m. family emergency. Then I texted Adriana on my way home now because maybe Noah was right. Maybe I had won. Maybe it was time to figure out what came after winning. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the elevator, leaving behind the office with my name on the door, the $3.2 billion in assets, the empire I'd built from the ashes of Ernest Ross's failure. For the first time in a year, none of it felt as important as getting home to my wife. The elevator doors closed and I caught my reflection in the polished steel. I looked successful, powerful, exactly like I'd always wanted to look. I also looked tired and maybe, just maybe, a little bit like Ernest Ross before everything fell apart. That thought bothered me more than I wanted to admit. The lobby of my building was all marble and glass, the kind of place where success echoed with every footstep. I walked through it without seeing any of it. Too busy thinking about Noah's words, about Adriana's text, about the fact that I was about to be a father and had no idea how to do that without treating it like another competition to win. My driver was waiting outside. Yeah, I had a driver now because apparently that's what happens when you manage billions. But I waved him off. I'll take a cab, take the rest of the day off. He looked confused but didn't argue. When you pay someone 6 figures to drive you around Manhattan, they learn not to question your decisions, even when those decisions make no sense. I hailed a cab, which took longer than it should have, because this was Manhattan and cabs operated on their own mysterious timeline. When I finally got one, I gave the driver my address and sat back, watching the city slide past the window. A year ago, I'd sat in a bankruptcy courtroom and watched Ernest Ross sign away everything he'd built. I'd felt nothing then. No triumph, no satisfaction, just the hollow knowledge that I'd won by default because my opponent had defeated himself. Now, sitting in traffic on a Tuesday afternoon while the city moved around me like I wasn't there, I wondered if maybe that hollow feeling had never actually left. I pulled out my phone and looked at the text from Adriano again. We need to talk. Those 4 words that every husband knows mean something important is happening. Something that requires actual presence instead of just physical proximity. The cab pulled up to my building. Our building technically, though, I still thought of it as mine because old habits die hard. I paid the driver, tipped too much because I could afford it, and guilt was cheaper than therapy, and headed inside. Adriana was in the living room sitting on the couch with her hands folded over her stomach in that protective way pregnant women do, even when they don't realize they're doing it. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful, but also serious in a way that made me nervous. "You canceled your afternoon," she said as I walked in. "Noah came to see me," I replied, sitting down next to her. "I know, I asked him too," he said. "You're worried about me." "I am." I took her hand, feeling the warmth of it, the realness of it, the anchor of it. "What did you want to talk about?" She placed my hand on her stomach, and I felt the slightest movement, like a butterfly trapped under fabric. "Our baby. Our actual baby, a human being who would depend on me for everything and wouldn't care about quarterly returns or market performance or how thoroughly I defeated my enemies." "I want to talk about forgiveness," Adriana said quietly. "About my father, about us, about what kind of family we want to be." And there it was, the conversation I'd been avoiding for a year. The one that mattered more than all the billions in assets and corner offices and victories combined. I took a deep breath and said the hardest words I'd ever said. "Okay, let's talk." Adriana didn't let go of my hand, which was probably strategic on her part because if she had, I might have found an excuse to get up and check my phone or make coffee or do literally anything other than have this conversation. But her grip was firm. Her dark eyes were locked on mine. And the baby in her stomach was apparently doing gymnastics, which felt like some kind of cosmic conspiracy to keep me emotionally present. "My father is dying," she said. And just like that, the air left the room. I blinked. "What? Pancreatic cancer? Stage 4. They caught it late because he hadn't been to a doctor in over a year. Too proud to admit he couldn't afford good health care anymore after losing everything." Her voice cracked slightly, but she kept going because Adriana had always been stronger than anyone gave her credit for. "He is maybe 6 months, maybe less." I sat there processing this information like it was market data that didn't make sense. Ernest Ross was dying. The man I'd spent the last year and a half systematically defeating, the man whose company I'd bought for pennies on the dollar, the man whose empire I'd built my own empire on top of, he was dying. "I'm sorry," I said, because that's what you say when someone tells you their father is dying. Even when that father had tried to destroy your career and blamed you for his own failures. "Are you?" Adriana asked. Not accusatory, just genuinely curious. "Sorry. I mean, because I honestly can't tell any more how you feel about him, about any of this." "I don't know," I admitted, which was maybe the most honest thing I'd said in months. I spent so long being angry at him, and then I spent a year watching him lose everything, and now he's dying and I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. "You're not supposed to feel anything," she said softly. "That's not how feelings work. But I need to know if you can forgive him. Not for his sake, for mine, for the baby's." There it was. The real conversation, not about Ernest dying, but about what kind of man I was going to be, what kind of father, what kind of husband, whether I was going to carry Ernest Ross's ghost around for the rest of my life, like emotional luggage I couldn't put down. "Adriana, your father tried to ruin me. He fired me out of jealousy, replaced me with no one, knowing it would fail, and then blamed me when everything collapsed. He filed complaints with the SEC. He told anyone who'd listen that I sabotaged him. For months, I couldn't go to industry events without people asking if I'd really destroyed Ross Capital on purpose." "I know," she said. "And you won. You won so completely that there's nothing left of him except a sick old man living in a studio apartment in Queens, alone, broke, and dying. You got everything you wanted. Marcus, his company, his reputation, his clients. You even got his daughter, though. I'd like to think that happened before all this mess. I almost smiled at that long before. So, the question isn't whether he deserves forgiveness," Adriana continued, her hand still on her stomach, still protecting the baby from a conversation it couldn't hear, but would probably inherit the consequences of. "The question is whether you want to spend the rest of your life being the guy who defeated Ernest Ross, or whether you want to be something more than that." I thought about Noah's visit earlier, about his words. "You're what Dad could have been if he'd been honest with himself." I thought about Ernest in that cafe a year ago, gray and defeated, admitting he'd been jealous for 17 years. I thought about the bankruptcy hearing, watching him sign away everything he'd built. And I thought about the baby doing flips in Adriana's stomach, who would grow up asking questions about their grandfather, about family history, about why Daddy didn't talk to Grandpa before he died. "What does forgiveness even look like here?" I asked. "I can't give him his company back. Can't restore his reputation. Can't undo what happened. He doesn't want any of that," Adriana said. "He just wants to meet his grandchild before he dies. He wants to apologize to you properly, not in some courthouse hallway, but like an actual human being. She paused, wiping at her eyes, even though she was trying not to cry. He wants to die knowing that his daughter doesn't hate him and that his grandchild might hear stories about him that aren't just about how he destroyed everything he touched. That's asking a lot. I know. And if you say no, I'll understand. I'll be disappointed and hurt and probably angry, but I'll understand because you're right. He tried to ruin you. He doesn't deserve forgiveness. But Marcus, she squeezed my hand harder. This baby deserves a grandfather, even a broken, dying one who made terrible mistakes. And I deserve a husband who isn't carrying around revenge like it's a second job. I looked at her, really looked at her. This woman who'd stood by me through earnest betrayal, through the Ross Capital collapse, through the bankruptcy and the lawsuits, and a year of me being so focused on winning that I'd probably been a terrible husband without even realizing it. When I asked, when what? When does he want to apologize? Her eyes went wide. You'll do it. I'll think about it. I corrected. But yeah, probably because you're right. I won. I won everything. And if I can't let go of being angry at a dying man, then what does that make me? What kind of father would I be if I taught our kid that revenge is more important than family? Adriana kissed me then, hard and desperate and relieved, like I just agreed to something that had been weighing on her for months, which I probably had. Thank you, she whispered against my lips. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said. I might still tell him to go to hell. You won't. How do you know? Because you're better than him, she said simply. You always have been. That's why you won. And that's why you'll forgive him. Not because he deserves it, but because you're the kind of man who can. I wanted to believe that. Wanted to be that guy. The guy who was bigger than his anger. Who could let go of grudges. Who could forgive people who'd tried to destroy him. But I'd spent so long being angry, so long keeping score, so long treating life like a competition where second place meant total failure that I wasn't sure I knew how to be anything else. I need to think about this. I said, okay, and if I do this, if I let him apologize and play grandfather and all that, I need you to understand something. I looked at her seriously. I'm doing this for you and for the baby, not for him. Ernest Ross is still the man who tried to ruin me. Forgiveness doesn't erase that. I know, Adriana said, but it does mean you're not letting him ruin you now. Even from rock bottom, even dying, he still has power over you as long as you're angry. Forgiveness takes that power away. Damn it. When did my wife get so wise? Had she always been this wise, and I'd been too busy being angry to notice? We sat there for a while, my hand on her stomach, feeling the baby move, thinking about fatherhood and family and what kind of legacy I wanted to leave that had nothing to do with quarterly returns or assets under management. Finally, I said, call him. Tell him we'll come over this weekend, but I'm not promising anything except showing up. That's all I'm asking. She pulled out her phone to text Ernest and I watched her type, watched her face soften with relief and hope and about 12 other emotions I probably should have been paying more attention to over the past year. My phone buzz. Work email. Something about the Norwegian fund wanting to increase their allocation by another 100 million. A year ago, that would have been the most important thing in my world. Right now sitting on my couch with my pregnant wife while she texted her dying father to arrange a meeting I didn't want to have, it felt completely irrelevant. I ignored the email Adriana said, setting down her phone Saturday at 2 his apartment in Queens. He's really grateful, Marcus, he said, to tell you thank you. He can tell me himself on Saturday. I said if he wants to apologize he can do it face to face, not through text messages and intermediaries. Fair enough. We ordered dinner, Thai food from the place down the street that Adriana had been craving for weeks, and spent the evening on the couch watching some cooking show neither of us really cared about. Normal, domestic, the kind of evening I'd been too busy to have for months while I was building my empire and proving points to people who'd already lost. Later that night, lying in bed while Adriana slept beside me, I thought about Ernest Ross in his studio apartment in Queens, dying alone, probably thinking about all the choices that had led him there. I thought about the baby that would be here in 4 months, who wouldn't care about revenge or victory or quarterly returns. I thought about Noah teaching high school math and actually being happy for the first time in his life. And I thought about what Adriana had said. Forgiveness takes that power away. Maybe she was right. Maybe holding on to anger at Ernest Ross was just another way of letting him control my life. Maybe real victory wasn't destroying your enemies, but becoming someone who didn't need to destroy enemies in the first place. Or maybe I was just getting soft because I was about to be a father and sleep deprivation was already affecting my judgment. Either way, Saturday was coming and I'd made a promise to my wife. Even if Ernest Ross didn't deserve forgiveness, maybe I deserved the freedom that came with giving it. That thought was almost funny. Almost. I'd spent 18 months proving I was better than Ernest Ross at running a company, managing money, and building an empire. Now I had to prove I was better at being human. Turned out that was the hardest competition of all. I rolled over, put my arm around Adriana, and felt the baby kick against my hand like it was already impatient to join this mess of a family we were building. "Your grandfather is an idiot," I whispered to her stomach. "But I guess you'll figure that out on your own." Adriana mumbled something in her sleep that sounded like, "be nice or maybe ice cream." And I smiled despite myself. Yeah, this was definitely going to be interesting.